I look pretty good for a dead bitch.
That's called comedy. Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Now for today's video is going to be something that I'm very excited for because it's actually books that I got recommended from my favorite K-pop idols. Now the K-pop idols that I'll be talking about and their book recommendations are Irene from Red Velvet, Jungkook from BTS, Jiyoung from GOT7, IU, and also Kai from EXO. And I'm so excited to talk about their books and to tell you if you should trust your favorite K-pop idols book recommendations. So let's get started. So the first book recommendation actually comes from Irene from Red Velvet, and this book is called Kim Jiyoung, Born 1982 by Choi Nam-joon. And this book follows a character named Kim Jiyoung who lives in Korea, and she's actually 30 something when we first start off the book. This book also goes from the past and present, and it tells the events that happened in Kim Jiyoung's life that kind of shaped her to be the female and the woman that she is in Korean society. And it talks about a lot about issues when she was growing up in a childhood home where she was taught that females are of lesser class than the male class, that her education is really important, but sometimes she's not able to surpass her male colleagues simply because of the culture that was instilled in Korea, and how the females have to stay at home and take care of the family and become a housewife, and to not worry about climbing the corporate ladder, and to always just think about the family in general and never to think more about herself. This book talked a lot about sexism, sexual assault, gender inequality, and many other issues relating to the female population and male population in South Korea. This book has also been to be known as very controversial in Korea, and it actually gotten Irene a lot of flack for it just because she actually read this book. This book has actually been adapted into a movie starring Gong Yoo and Jung Yoo Mi, and this one was a fantastic read. I really enjoyed this very short story. It was around 200 and something pages. It's something that you can definitely fly through in 3 hours. It's something that's very eye-opening for sure because it includes a lot of facts that are detailing from the Korean statistics, and it also talks about a lot of issues that nobody really likes to think about but actually lives and experiences. It talks a lot about all the sacrifices that females tend to make for the better good of their families in Asian cultures and Asian communities. It also talks about how Kim Ji-young slowly loses her mind as she is going through her life and actually reflecting on the events, and then also taking care of a new youngborn and also being a good housewife in her new family household. I found this book to be really intriguing, and it really gripped me from the start. The writing is actually Korean, but it actually got translated into English, so it does read a little bit simpler if you are an English reader, but I'm sure you still appreciate the words written on the page, and I really loved the message it conveyed in this book. And I really recommend you to actually watch the movie first and then read the book. Me personally, I watched the movie because I'm a fan of Gong Yoo, and I actually watched the movie first before I read the book, but then the movie actually helped me visualize certain events, because I do admit that the book does get a little bit confusing with the whole back and forth, past and present, and the events may not be as descriptive as possible, so the movie really brings everything to life. Either way, it's a very good book, and I highly recommend you to read this one. I gave Irene's book recommendation a 5 out of 5 stars. So the next book recommendation actually comes from IU, and IU is one of my favorite idols simply because she's cute, she's adorable, and I love her music. So her book recommendation is actually No Longer Human, and now this one tells the story of a character who is kind of trying to figure out his identity. And this book actually tells the story of a male-female character who doesn't feel like he actually is a human anymore. He feels very different from the rest of the crowd, and he also feels like that he doesn't fit in a lot of the times, so much to the fact that he actually has to create a new character for himself. He puts on his makeup, he puts on his clothes, and he puts on an act. He is happy in the world, he's happy living in Japan, and he's happy living with the new customs that Japan brings with the Cultural Revolution and with all the changes in society. This book also follows kind of a sad story where our main character feels that he is so left out of everything and that he can't connect with anybody, that he no longer feels human, and this is kind of like the sad story of him losing connection with a lot of people. Now this book is something that is a lot deeper than I expected. It's definitely one of the classic literature pieces that has a lot of layers to it. It's kind of like an onion. The more you peel, the more you kind of understand the character, but also if you don't understand the character or you don't really care about the story, you're not going to get the same emotional pull and emotional effect. I would recommend you to read this book if you like classic novels, and if you guys like to sit back and kind of dive deeper into character development and how the character kind of drives the story moving forward. And our main character kind of reminds me of the main character in Catcher in the Rye, simply because they're both kind of reclusive characters who don't really interact with others and who find trouble connecting with society, but also dealing with a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, and a lot of mental illness. Unfortunately, this book just didn't really captivate my attention too much, mostly because probably I just don't understand it a lot. So I can't really give you a fair rating. A rating that I will give it based on my enjoyment level would actually just be a 2 out of 5 stars. And a lot of people actually adore this book so much. This book has like a 4-star rating on Goodreads. So don't let my rating discourage you from reading this piece if you feel like that you are interested in reading this book. So the next book that I read from a K-pop idol is actually Jungkook's book recommendation, which is actually The Little Prince. Now, The Little Prince is kind of a classic that I'm sure a lot of people have actually read in their lives, or at least know that character and know the story. So The Little Prince kind of follows a pilot who kind of crashes into this planet, and then he meets this little character called the Little Prince. And the Little Prince kind of tells him his adventures and his stories of traveling to different planets, trying to find a home for his flower, and trying to find a suitable place for himself to live. He talks about how his home planet is very small and it doesn't really inhabit a lot of creatures, but he's happy there and he wants to take care of his flower. And then throughout the different planets that he visits, readers kind of feel different themes in the book. It kind of talks about a child growing older and losing a piece of their childhood bit by bit, year by year, because of society pressures and also because of things that are just deemed more important than having fun and to care about other things. It talks about how adults really care about possessions, really care about status, really cares about money, and really cares about, frivolous things that nobody should really care about, but a child doesn't care about these things, and a child only cares about having fun and really just living their lives to the fullest. So there's this compare and contrast element to this book, which a lot of readers actually really enjoy and really like. I can actually see why Jungkook actually recommended this book, because I can see a lot through his emotions, through the music that he puts out with his group BTS. BTS talks a lot about youth, growth, and really to surpass the negative emotions that come with young adulthood and also adulthood, and also the stress and daily pressures of it. And that's why BTS's music is kind of really relatable, because the youth really relates to this kind of motion, because we kind of all feel the same. So I can see why Jungkook recommended this book. Unfortunately for me, this is actually my second time reread of The Little Prince. The first time I read this book was actually in 2015, and back then I was 5 years younger and I actually didn't really understand the themes of the book, and I didn't really get it, mostly because I wasn't really going through those phases yet. When I did a reread in 2021 for this video, I kind of understood a better grasp of the story, but it just didn't sit right with me, mostly because the characters were really different, were really weird. It's a supernatural kind of way, and it's also kind of sci-fi. So I just didn't really connect with the characters that much. I understood the themes that were spoken about in the book, but I just ultimately didn't care about the Little Prince, and I didn't care about the characters. So it just kind of left me empty inside when I finished reading it, and it was a little bit slow and a little bit tad boring, even though it's a very short book. This one I actually ended up just giving an average rating of 3 out of 5 stars, but definitely check it out if you guys haven't read this classic yet. So the next book that I read is actually from one of my favorite K-pop groups in K-pop. They were the group that actually got me into K-pop, and I love them so much. And I love them so much even though they haven't been putting out music together as a group recently, mostly because some members were in the military, other members decided to start their own solo careers and things like that. But I still really stand and support EXO. This book recommendation actually comes from Kai from EXO. And now Kai isn't actually my bias. My bias is actually Sehun and Baekhyun, but I don't know if they read or not. Sehun actually has a book recommendation out, but unfortunately it hasn't been translated from Korean to English, so I couldn't read the book. But I decided to read Kai's book recommendation, which is actually a crime and thriller novel that was translated from Japanese to Korean for him to read, and also for me to read is Japanese to English. Now, this crime thriller mystery novel is called The Devotion of Suspect X, and this is basically about a story of a wife who has been abused for a long time and who's been emotionally abused in a long time. So after she divorces her abusive husband and she lives and takes care of their teenage daughter, she is not surprised that he comes back and demands for certain things like more money and for a place to live, and basically to bring misery and negativity to the family household. The wife decides that enough is enough enough and actually ends up killing her ex-husband. And what happens is that the next door neighbor, who seems very reclusive, who seems by himself a lot and very quiet and well-mannered and well-educated because he's actually a math professor at a high school, actually comes and helps her bury his body. And this is basically the story of an investigator trying to figure out who has killed this man, and if the wife and the professor and the daughter, who were all involved in the crime, can get away with it. And it's kind of like a cat and mouse game in such a way. There's a lot of twists and turns that happen, and there's a lot of really smart deductive skills that happen with our lead investigator and also his junior detectives. If you're a fan of mystery and crime thriller novels, then maybe check out this book. But unfortunately for me, because of how the book was actually set up and how we already knew who killed the man, there just wasn't that much mystery to it. It was really just us watching the investigator make mistakes and trying to like figure out like who done it when we already know who done it. And I guess what's really interesting about this book is also because the math professor in the university is actually really brilliant and really smart and continuously tries to help cover up this mess, while the investigator is also really smart and he kind of suspects that the math professor has something to do with it, but he can't put his finger on it, and he also doesn't have enough evidence to convince the whole team that, you know, he's in on it. So it's kind of like a thrilling aspect in the sense, and it reminds me of a lot of Korean thriller movies that I'm addicted to and that I really like and really enjoy. I know this is a book recommendations video review on K-pop idols, but I have to sneak in some movie recommendations to you too. If you guys want to watch a very fast-paced Korean thriller that is one of my favorites and that I really enjoy, I would recommend you to watch A Hard Day. And this one tells the story of a homicide detective who accidentally kills someone on the road when he's driving to his mom's funeral, and then he actually has to figure out a way to cover up his crimes so that he doesn't get arrested and he doesn't go to jail. And what better person to really help him but himself, who also is very familiar with the crime scene investigation. But what happens when he receives mysterious texts and mysterious calls that basically tell him that they watched him and they saw it all go down, and now this is kind of like a cat and mouse game where our homicide detective actually has to try to figure out who is threatening him and who is manipulating him, and if he really is the killer of the person. So the last book recommendation actually comes from one of my new favorite groups that I stan a lot now, and it's actually GOT7. You know, when I first started liking GOT7, it took a long time for me to get into their music, but now that I consistently listen to their top hits and to their hits, I actually really love this group and I really like the music, and I feel like it's just always so cool and so unique. So if you guys haven't checked out GOT7 yet, definitely go do it. So this book recommendation actually comes from Jinyoung, and this book is actually called Perfume, and it's called The Story of a Murderer. And this one is kind of a really good book. It's a book that I believe was written in French and was translated into English, and it tells the story of a little baby that was born from a fisherman's wife, and basically she had a lot of stillbirths. She had a lot of births that happened that she kind of just let to die because she couldn't have enough money to take care of the baby. So she thought that she was doing mercy killings by just letting them kind of like freeze to death and just to starve to death underneath her table that she cuts fish. And then what happens is that somebody actually discovers the baby and arrests the mother, and the mother is actually executed for her crimes, and now the baby is actually an orphan, and the baby is taken into an orphanage where a milkmaid is responsible for taking care of this baby and feeding this baby and raising the baby. However, the milkmaid in the very beginning of the novel describes this baby to be none like the others. He is kind of like a devil in a sense, and he kind of has a weird aura around him that gives everybody chills, and everybody just doesn't want to be near him. There's something wrong with him, but nobody can put a finger on it. And the milkmaid is actually very repulsed by this baby. He eats a lot, he cries a lot, and he also doesn't smell at all. And there's like no scent to him. And this baby's kind of like put into different characters' households so that he can be raised. But ultimately, he kind of lives in this very depressing and very difficult life where nobody really loves him and nobody wants to connect well with him. So he goes through a series of jobs as he grows up as a teenager, teenager, and we kind of see him moving along these life events. The reader sees that he goes through different jobs until he lands his favorite job and his perfect job for him and his special ability of smelling things, which is at a perfume shop. He is able to detect certain notes to everything. He can tell like different pieces of wood apart. He can tell how many humans are in a house simply from the scent of each human. He can tell who is in the house from the scent of each human. It's just that he's so weird and different from the others that the readers can't help but feel that something is wrong with him and that something sinister is also going to happen, not just from the title of the book, but also from the creepy, chilling feeling that you feel when you're reading this book. And now he works at a perfume shop where he helps this perfume maker make perfumes, and the business grows and it's becoming very successful. But what happens when one night he kind of goes out by himself onto the streets of Paris and he smells this really beautiful scent that he can't get enough of, and he actually commits his first murder. And now this book tells a story of a person who's just so obsessed with smelling and perfumes and the scent that he is willing to do all these things that are illegal and crazy just for this scent. And it's a creepy, chilling novel that I really recommend you to read if you guys want a classic that's on the shorter side and that will leave you kind of scared in the middle of the night. But anyways, that is it for all the book recommendations that I read from K-pop idols. I really enjoyed making this video because I just wanted to challenge myself to read books out of the norm. And I really like K-pop, so what better way than to merge these two ideas together by putting my book recommendations and K-pop idols into one video. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video and you guys enjoyed the book recommendations that I talked about, and hopefully you guys can pick up your favorite K-pop idols book recommendations too, and let me know if you have read these books already and if you guys enjoy them or not, and who your favorite K-pop idols are and who your favorite K-pop groups are in the comments. There's a lot of things I'm asking you to do, but feel free to start a conversation with me in the comments. But until next time, I'll see you guys again with a new video. Bye.